Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Wild Doggies Fan podcast. If you're new here, please like the video, comment down below, subscribe, and stay tuned for all future videos. Welcome to episode 14. Today's going to be a really great episode. We're covering a lot of different topics, signing news, logo news, championships games, international games. This is also part 4 of my end of year season review for every team. And yeah, this is going to be a great episode, and without wasting any more time, let's dive straight into it. We'll begin with the Week 3 reviews for the International Championships. No, for the Pacific Championships. And the first game on the Saturday evening, the Kiwis and Tonga went at it in Auckland, New Zealand. Tonga gained the shock win and an incredible game, beat the Kiwis 25 points to 24, a 1-point win. This game was really was a game of two halves. First half was all Tonga, scoring 4 tries in 32 minutes. Then in the second half, the Kiwis score 3 tries and 1 at the end of the first half, which then makes the game 24 all, up until the 75th minute, where Saga does an incredible field goal, which ultimately leads to Tonga getting the win. This was a great game from both teams. Obviously, in each separate halves, they weren't as good. Like in the first half, the Kiwis weren't that good. In the second half, Tonga weren't that good. But overall, Tonga did get the win. And this is actually their second ever win against the Kiwis. So this is an incredible moment for the Tongans. And this was a really great game. Watching this game, Tonga did what we thought they would do with their kind of forward pack. You had people like AFB, Jason Tamalolo, a few of the other boys. They were just charging through the middle, and they were absolutely bullying the Kiwis. AFB is the captain, Kafusi, Olakawatu, Eli Katoa, Jason Tamalolo, they were all playing outstanding footy. They were using their big bodies, charging down through the middle, and they were just picking apart the Kiwis. And this was a huge, that first half was an absolutely incredible, outstanding piece of play from the Tongans, and it's an incredible moment in Pacific Championship history if you think about it. So that's such a dominant first half, and full credit to the Kiwis, man. In the second half, they were really fighting back. The likes of Keanu Kinney, Finks, Crossland, Joseph Tarpanay, they all gave it their all to try and score. Tarpanay, that was a brilliant try from him with the several grubbers, outrunning everyone to then score, which leveled up the game. And it was fantastic. But full credit to the Tongans, man. They absolutely powerhouse through the middle. They did what a forward pack like that would do. It was really entertaining to watch. I thought the Kiwis would win. I was a bit disappointed with how their first half played out. And I think for Sean Johnson, making his return from retirement, he's so far now lost 2 matches for the Kiwis, and he'll now be forced to play a relegation match next week against PNG, which we'll be covering later. So very disappointing for the Kiwis. An incredible achievement for the Tongans. Otherwise than that, it was a really good game. Not much else really to say. It was just a great contest between 2 great teams. And Tonga was just ultimately, as I said last week, whoever wins this game was clearly the team that wanted to win more. And for me, what I saw out there, Tonga wanted to win the game more. And another thing, at my work, when Australia versed Tonga a few weeks back, even though they lost 18-0, they were all partying out on the streets. It looked like Belmore. The cars honking, they had banners, the flags were being waved everywhere, they had music pumping, discos, strobe lights. It was really, really interesting near my work. I was seeing all that unfold. And then again, on Saturday, same thing. Car engines being revved, horns being beeped, people cheering, dancing, singing. And it was just a great festivity. And, I'm very excited to see what will happen I'm very curious to see the kind of performances we're going to see from their crowd and their fan base after the game against Australia next week, or this Sunday. Regardless, we'll be moving on to the next game. on the Sunday afternoon, PNG versus Cook Islands. PNG got the win in Port Moresby, 42 points to 20. And yeah, PNG were fantastic in this game. For a while the game was fairly even. PNG scores in the first 5 minutes, and then Cook Islands scores back, and then Cook Islands goes again. They take a penalty goal, and they're up 14-4. But then right before halftime, the last 10 minutes, PNG scores 2 tries, which make it 16 points to 14. And the second half was just all PNG. 42nd, 46th, and 49th minute they score. Then the 57th. Then the 71st minute, Cook Islands score. And then in the last minute of the game, PNG scores one more time to seal the game. Or not to seal it, but to lock up the game and, beat them quite convincingly. Very dominant game. And now they have a chance next week to compete against the Kiwis in a relegation match, which will be really, really entertaining to watch. But we're talking about this current game. And yeah, PNG were just charging through the middle, spraying the ball out wide, several line breaks, and they could have easily scored a bunch more tries, but they just bombed a few opportunities. And for Cook Islands, they simply just don't have the roster. They don't have much else to really, compete with these teams yet. But you never know. Maybe they'll find their stars eventually. But PNG, man, they clearly are trying to show the rest of the rugby league community that they want to play NRL, and they're really giving it their all. They had a great game against Fiji, and now a great game against Cook Islands. I'd be very, very interested to see what happens with them moving forward. It's going to be very interesting, and this game was very impressive. You had a lot of players scoring a bunch of tries. No hat-tricks, but a few try-doubles. It was really good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good laugh, a good enjoyment to enjoy those kind of games. That's really it for Pacific Championship this week. Not a whole lot to cover. However, now we move on to my review for the only game for international games, round 3. There was only one game. That was England and Samoa round 2, like they versed again. They versed 1:30 a.m. on Sunday the 3rd of November. England got the win 34 points to 16 over Samoa, and a very disappointing game by Samoa. But what I want to talk about first was my viewing experience of this game. Obviously, last week I did watch the game. I was with my friends on texting or watching the games at our own homes. We decided for this one, though, we'd actually get together to watch the game. So after work, I finished about 12:30, I think I finished. I drove straight to my mate's house, and all the other boys were already there. And we actually watched this game together, and I found that really enjoyable. It was a lot of fun. To enjoy that kind of, it's great to watch a game with your mates and enjoy it. It's again good. You get to laugh during the game. You get to have discussions about the game during the game, and not over a phone, but with your mates. I think that was really enjoyable for me. I really enjoyed doing that. But the actual game itself, I was a bit disappointed. I thought after last week, Samoa would want to redeem themselves. They'd want to get the win. I know they're not at full strength, but I really thought they'd give it a proper crack against England, but unfortunately it just wasn't meant to be. And they started really well. Again, Sean Bloor scores in the first 12 minutes, and it was an outstanding try. It was really good. And I thought, you know what, maybe Samoa have the chance to really upset the English and get this win. Boy, was I wrong. England then scored in the 22nd, 26th, 31st, and 37th minute in the first half. The halftime score was 22-6. Very unfortunate. Second half, Jake Tonga scores first for Samoa. But then, in the 53rd and 66th minute, England score again. The game's pretty much done at this point. But in the 72nd minute, Jeremiah Nanai scores. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. I think another thing I want to point out about in the first half, Palga got sin bin in the 25th minute. And it was actually from that point onwards where the points started to roll. Again, 26th, 31st, 37th. Like, that's 3 tries in 11 minutes. And I know Palga was on by the time the 37th minute try was scored. Means nothing. England were just too good. And I think that one man disadvantage from Samoa was just... It was like the last thing they need. They were already disadvantaged when it's 13 on 13. So when it was 12 on 13, it was very, very obvious that England were just going to run away with this. I was very concerned. The second I saw him get sin bin, I was like, oh no, this could get ugly. And I was correct. I think a big standout and a player I really want to talk about from this game was Herbie Farnworth. He's back-to-back Dally M Centre of the Year in the NRL. You know, he's now scored the most amount of tries, I think, against Samoa for an English player. I think he scored 6 tries against Samoa overall, which is really great. He had an outstanding game. Even on Sunday, Harley Farmer scores back-to-back tries. They were both great. He was outstanding. I think he's going to go down as a very underrated centre. I think he's a player to keep an eye out for going into next year. And when I say underrated, obviously by the journos and the fair few people rate him very well, because he won Dally M back-to-back years. But by the fans, when people talk about great centres, not many say Herbie Farnworth, but I've always rated him, and I think going into next year, it's another year of improvement for him. And yeah, he was an absolute standard. He was my player of the match in this game. He was fantastic. Yeah, otherwise than that, it was an alright. Samoa just didn't play very well, I'll be honest. I was very disappointed. I thought they'd show a bit more fight. Wasn't meant to be. Not much else we can do. They weren't at fully strength, But it was almost the same scoreline. Again, last week was 34-18. This week, 34-16. I've done the math. Samoa conceded exactly double the amount of points that they scored. Like, Samoa scored 34 points across 2 weeks, but conceded 68. So, yeah, very disappointing from Samoa. However, again, they weren't fully strength, but I think it was very disappointing. That's all I can really say. So with that, the international games are all done for this year. And that means the only thing left to do tips and predictions for is the Pacific Championships Finals. So the first game on Sunday, the 10th of November at 4:05 p.m. at CommBank Stadium. The Kangaroos will take on Tonga. This is going to turn out to be a really cracker game. I'm really excited for it. I'm really interested. Tonga had the chance to repeat 2019, and this time on a finals scale. And the Kangaroos had a chance to lock up this series 3-0, which would be really good. There's no real major changes to either the 1-12. So, obviously, I'm backing the Kangaroos to win this. But I'm going to do 1-12. I don't think it'll be 13+. I think Tonga are going to really put up a fight. And I think that the Kangaroos are going to want to make sure 2019 doesn't repeat itself. And they're going to want to get the win. Especially after last year, they played 2 games and then they got pumped in the finals. So, yeah. I'm doing the Kangaroos 1-12, and for anytime try scorers, I'm going to do the Hammer, Harry Grant, Daniel Tupou, and AFB. I think all 4 of them are going to score in this match. Moving on to the second game on the 10th of November at 6:20 p.m. The Kiwis versus PNG Commonwealth. And it's very disappointing that the Kiwis are now playing a relegation match after having a very poor Pacific Championship series so far this year. And I think this needs to be a major turnaround game for them. They really need to step it up and get the win here. So I am backing them to win this. As much as I really have enjoyed PNG's performance, I don't think they have what it takes to beat the Kiwis. So I am backing the Kiwis in this, but only by 1-12. And I'll be picking Will Warbrick and Keanu Kinney for the Kiwis. And then Elijah Rodalinga and then Carl Laybut from PNG to score in this game. So, yeah, I expect both games to be very close this weekend. But I also expect I've got my try scorers picked. Another thing I want to point out is this really weird decision that the NRL have made, or the organisers of this event have made. For some reason, they've got the relegation match first at 6:20 p.m. and then, why is the relegation game after the finals game? I understand that the finals game is actually like the Kangaroos and Tonga game. That's happening first because it's going to be at 4 or 5 p.m., which means it's going to be like prime time on Channel 9. And of course, that's what they care about the most, is getting those viewerships, the revenue. So they want to put that game first because that they get the prime time slot. But I still think it's weird that we have the finals game first and then the relegation game afterwards. I don't know, I think it's really weird, but I understand why they've done that. Bit of a bizarre choice, but again, at the end of the day, it's all about that revenue. It's all about getting the viewership numbers on all platforms. So yeah, that's my Pacific Championships finals tips and predictions. Now we move on to other news. First things first, we'll do some Bulldogs coverage. On Friday, they released a 90-year logo for next year. It is a logo that combines all the great logos of our history and merges them into one great logo. And I've got it here in my notes I want to discuss my thoughts on it. What else can I say except it's a beautiful logo. I think showing our rich history is, I think for the way this club needs to progress, I think showing our history in front of everyone is a key factor in what it will take for us to progress forward. Like, we are technically like the third oldest club in the NRL at the moment. We're not a merger club. So to me, I think we are the third oldest NRL club. You know, next year's 90 years of history, 8 premierships, several finals appearances, several grand finals. Obviously, we've had our dark days the last 8 or so years, but we're in a new era. We're moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think having a logo that pays homage to so many great moments or great logos of our history. You know, you got the OG CB one from like the 30s through to the 50s. You've got the iconic, the really well-known one with the Bulldog in the middle and the black outline during that peak era. Our current logo that obviously has had its darker moments, but also some bright lights when we were in the grand finals in both 2014 and 2012, and many more in between. It's an outstanding logo. I think the Bulldogs have nailed it in terms of getting this logo done right. And I believe at the time of this recording, tomorrow they'll be announcing, or they'll be showcasing the jerseys for next year. And I'm already saying from now, take my money. I will be buying a jersey for next year without a doubt. Like, it's a no-brainer. It's a fantastic logo. And I want a piece of that logo. I want to be able to commemorate 90 years of history. So I'll be definitely buying some sort of merch showcasing that logo next year. And in saying all this, my next topic will cover a very dark moment for our club recently. Over the course of last week, we said farewell to Josh Adokar. He has officially been sacked by the Bulldogs. He will not be playing with us moving forward. This was something we saw coming for a long time, from when we signed Marcelo Montoya, from when there were all these articles coming out about, you know, what's going to happen to Foxx, and then the whole thing about Gus, and, you know, when Latrell got done for doing cocaine, he said that he wouldn't stand for it at his club. Then it happened at Adokar. He had to be a man of his word. And look, this is coming from someone who loved the Foxx. Like, during our really, really dark days, like, we just won the spoon, him coming to our club, it was such an entertaining player to watch. The tries, the attitude, the celebrations, his personality, and the energy he brought to the club. that's something we needed during our really doom and gloom days. And as much as it's so tragic that this is how his career at the Bulldogs ended, he clearly loved the club, but unfortunately he made some stupid choices, and unfortunately actions have consequences no matter who you are. And the new mentality we're bringing to our club first, team second, individual third. Unfortunately, the Foxx didn't do that. He put himself first, and during the week before finals, he wants to go do cocaine and then drive, and does all this stupid shit, and it was a very selfish thing for him to do. And again, in my opinion, if he plays in that finals game against Manly, we most likely win it, because that try that Skelton dropped over in the corner in the first half, if the Foxx was there, he would have scored that for all money. So it is very disappointing, and I want to say a huge thank you to the Foxx for bringing so many great memories during a time period where there were so many dark memories of the club, so many negative memories. He brought positivity to the club when pretty much it was non-existent. And yeah, I'm very disappointed that this has happened, but it is what it is. We need to move forward from this, and it's a real shame. But unfortunately, actions have consequences, and it's the standard that the club needs to set and needs to make an example of that. No matter who you are, no player is bigger than the club. So farewell, Foxx. Thank you for all the great memories. Thank you for all that you've done. And good luck at whatever club you end up going to, because I'm sure another club will pick you up. And yeah, I'm very disappointed, but we need to move forward from this. Good luck, Foxx. That's all I can say. Now we move on from that. We'll progress to a different team getting a new logo. The Dragons have taken the Manly route and have simplified their logo. Now, me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it. Mainly because I have some family members that support St. George. I also, St. George is a saint. And I think having that kind of religious stuff is important. And I think it's a bit disappointing that the logo has been forgone now. It's to me, it's an iconic logo. That logo to me is very well known. So for it to be removed and have such a simplistic logo take its place, very disappointing. I'm not the biggest fan of the logo, but I get why they've made the changes. I've read this. I'm not 100% too sure, but I know that there was an article posted about why they changed it. I didn't really get it. I think they should have just kept it, but I'm not the biggest fan of this logo, and I personally think they should have kept the old one. But I get it. They're trying to just go down the simplistic route, try some new merchandising for next year. So yeah, it's another club going down the new logo route, but making it simplistic, like the Raiders, like the Titans, like Manly, doing all that similar stuff. Every team is starting to just do that slowly, piece by piece. Speaking of the Dragons, the Ben Hunt saga for the Dragons is now officially over. As of last week, he was let go by the club and is now a free agent after what was one of the most toxic player-club relationships I've ever seen. Ben Hunt has now been officially released. He's a free agent. He can go look for another club. He's finally free. And yeah, that's a wrap to the Ben Hunt saga. But that raises the question, where does he go now? The hot tip is that he's either going to go to the Titans or the Dolphins. Both teams need a veteran player at the club. They're both Queensland teams, which obviously is where Ben Hunt has made it apparent where he wants to go. But obviously we can't officially rule out all Sydney teams. For a Sydney team, the only two I can really see wanting to go for him is maybe the Bulldogs and the Roosters. They're the only two teams I can see wanting to make an effort for him. But I do think either the Titans or the Dolphins will want to pick him up. Another smoky, though, would be the Newcastle Knights, which is a club that desperately needs to sort out their halves pairing problem. I think bringing in a veteran like Ben Hunt would be beneficial for them. But I don't know with Kalimpong that team, they might have much of a salary cap to even bring in Ben Hunt. They're all over the place at the moment. So yeah, very, very interesting to see where Ben Hunt goes, and it's a bit kind of sad to see the Ben Hunt saga over. He was so synonymous with the club and the whole toxic relationship about how he kept wanting to leave, but the club wanted to keep him, and that was so back and forth. And then all with Zach Lomax, like he was allowed to leave, but Ben Hunt still wasn't. But now they've both been released. One's already signed with another club, one's looking to go somewhere else, and it's very interesting to see where this all goes moving forward. And the biggest thing, what's going to happen with the Dragons now? They've lost their two star origin players, their two representative players on top of that, who were easily, in my opinion, their best two players for the club this year. They're now both gone. That really makes you wonder what's going to happen with them moving forward. Who's going to be their new proper halfback? Who's going to fill the shoes that Zach Lomax filled in this year? And yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see where the Dragons go next year. And yeah, the Ben Hunt saga is now officially over. Which then brings up the next topic of NRL signing season for 2025. That is now officially begun as of November 1st. Players like Clint Gutherson, Terrell May, Leo Thompson, and many more are either free or they're looking to get contracts for 2026 onwards. There are several players there's actually quite a lot of players that are out on the open market that I'm sure several clubs would want to get. However, there was a list put out of like the major teams or the major players that are free agents. I'm going to just read off a list and I'll just say where I think they should go and all that stuff. So, Clint Gutherson, Reece Robson, Britton Nickora, Ben Hunt, Delly Cherry Evans, Braden Trindle, Leo Thompson, Solomon Cobbo, Ryan Pappenhausen, Dylan Brown, and Terrell May. First one, Clint Gutherson. We discussed 2 weeks ago we discussed this about Gutherson. And I think he'll go to the Dragons. I think that's already been in discussion that he'll be going to the Dragons. It is a bit disappointing that a player so loyal to his club has now been pretty much released. He's been told to go away. They've now ended his contract permanently. Like, that's it. It wasn't like a few weeks ago where he still had another year with them. No, they've just ended the contract, and yeah, he's now free to go anywhere he wants. So I think he'll end up at the Dragons. The next one, Reece Robson, I think he'll stay at the Cowboys. I think they'll re-sign him. They're going to want to keep him. He's a gun hooker. Besides Harry Green is one of the best in the game, they'll want to keep him. I can't see him going anywhere. Bryden Nickora, I can see the same thing. He'll be staying at the Sharkies. He's got so much ceiling, so much potential. And this is now the time where the Sharks are in a premiership window. They genuinely, with AFB now coming to their team next year, their premiership window is beginning to open. And with all the players they have at the moment, they really should be aiming for a premiership. So I think keeping Bryden Nickora would be essential. Ben Hunt, we already discussed. Either Titans or Dolphins. Braden Trindle, that is kind of pointless now because as of a few days ago, he was officially re-signed. He'll be staying there till 2027. So that one's kind of irrelevant. So in his place, we'll be talking about the two Broncos centers, both Selwyn Cobbo and Kotoni Staggs. Both which I could see leaving the club. I can see Cobbo leaving because he's already spent some time shitting on Kevin Walters on podcasts. He hasn't really found his form. He was great in 2023, but besides that, he's been really poor. He's got a really negative attitude, and I think he won't fit the style that Madge wants for the Broncos, and I can see Cobbo going elsewhere. As for which club, that's a whole other question. I'm not too sure. Potentially Newcastle, Tigers, Roosters. That's really it. And the other one, Kotoni Staggs, He's such a hard worker. He's very loyal to his club. However, I can see clubs want to pay big dollars for him. He might want to go play for a New South Wales team because he is a New South Welshman after all. And then the major team that he'll go for, and the one I think will most likely get him, and that is the Sydney Roosters. I think they've lost both their centers now, and Joseph Swali and Joseph Manu. And even though Palga is really good, I think they're going to want to bring in someone a bit more experienced. So I can't see a world where Tony Staggs is signed by the Roosters. I can just imagine him in red, blue, and white. So that's my opinion on where both the Broncos centers should be going. Ryan Papenhuyzen, we discussed that last week. I think he'll re-sign with Melbourne. But if he does go elsewhere, it might be either the Bulldogs or another club desperate for a fullback. And the last one, Dylan Brown, he'll stay at the Parramatta. That's not even a question. So I have a Daly Cherry Evans. So in their place, we're talking about Terrell May, who last week was told he can go look elsewhere. I think he'll go to the Bulldogs. Same with Leo Thompson. I think both of them should come to the Bulldogs. They're two massive forwards. As you all know, for the last couple of weeks, I've been harping on the fact that we should be signing Leo Thompson. And now that Terrell May's in the picture, we should be going for him as well. Both of them have great potential, big bodies, mongrels. They would be, I think, the two biggest pieces we need to add to our puzzle, which will complete our set. And yeah, that's really it. I'm just having a look through the list. Yeah, that's really it for the big name free agents. You know, Terrell May is now free to go. He'll probably go to hopefully he'll go to the Bulldogs. Same for Leo Thompson. Obviously, there's a few other players off contract. They're not the big names. However, one last thing I want to cover before I move on. Reece Walsh signed the biggest deal in Broncos history, getting paid $5 million for 5 years. He will now stay with the Broncos for 5 years, getting $1 million every season. That is a terrific signing by the Broncos. He has so much potential. As much as everyone likes to shit on him, he is a fantastic player. You know, if you want someone to create a big moment, you give the ball to Walsh. I think getting him for the next 5 years, they're really going to bring the best out of him, and he might become one of the best fullbacks in our game. He already is on the rise, so give him more time to mature, give him more time to develop his game, work on his issues, man. He could be a absolute iconic fullback. So now that that's over and done with, we move on to our end of season wrap up. This week's topics will be the best signings of 2024 and the best games of 2024. I think both of those are great topics to cover, and I think they'll be the last two parts of our wrap-up series before we do our final coverage. So, let's get straight into it. First things first, the best signings of 2024. I'll give you my top 10, and I'll list my reasons why. In 10th spot, Kyle Weeks. He was absolutely electric for the Raiders. You know, he was an absolute speedster. He was really good. Like, he was a real highlight of their year. So I think him coming to the club was a great move for him. He's excelling over there, and I think another year under his belt, he'll be better for it. In 9th spot, Sean Bloor. When you go to the Melbourne system, you're going to be a great player. It was going to happen. And I think he was he scored a great try over the Bulldogs, which won them a game against us in round 6. He scored some great tries. He's a really good player, and I think Sean Bloor was one of the best signings of the year. In 8th spot, Paul Alamotti to the Penrith Panthers. You know, he scored a try in the grand final. He got to win a premiership. He took over when Taylor May was dealing with off-field problems. He came from the Bulldogs. I remember joking with my dad that he was going to win Dally M Center of the Year. He obviously didn't do that, but May, he was an absolute gun center, and yeah, he was really good. He honestly should be higher on this list, but there's just a few other players I think had a better year than Paul Alamotti. Because Alamotti obviously missed a lot of games because he wasn't consistently in the side. He had a few injuries. In 7th spot, Dominic Young for the Sydney Roosters. Great try scorer. He was when Joey Manu gave him the ball, he was great. He was really entertaining to watch. Great for my super coach as well. He just had some really dumb errors in his game. He dropped the ball a few times, a few poor defensive reads. That's why he's a bit lower on this list. In 6th spot, Luke Brooks for the Manly Sea Eagles. He was really good. He finally got to play finals for the first time. A veteran of the game. And he was a great addition for Manly. He finally got a chance to excel, to add a lot of pressure taken off of him, and he was a great 5'8" this year. In 5th spot, Herbie Farnworth. He was really good for the Dolphins. He was great defensively, scoring a lot of great tries, had that brilliant game against the Broncos. Herbie Farnworth was a great signing for them. Obviously, he didn't get to reach his full potential because he had a few injuries to start the year. But overall, he was a really great signing for them, and I really enjoyed watching him play. In 4th spot, Spencer Leniu for the Roosters. Obviously, he played the first game, then missed 8 weeks due to supposed racial remarks. Won't get into that. He got suspended for 8 weeks for comments he made, and that hindered his game. Obviously, took him out of the picture for a long time. But then he got to play Origin for all 3 games. Was one of the best parts of that Origin series. Absolutely dominated for the Roosters. He became known as Back Fence Spence. He developed a bit of a cult following at the Roosters. And yeah, he was a great signing. In 3rd spot, Connor Tracy for the Bulldogs. Came in as a winger, didn't get much of a preseason, spent the first few weeks on the wing, but then when he got a chance to play fullback, he absolutely stepped up his game. He became Mr. Reliable. I had no issues with him under the high ball. He was really good. I really enjoyed watching him play. When he was out of the team for like a week or so, it was really apparent that we needed him in a part of our squad because, he brought a different level to our game. In 2nd spot, Josh Curran for the Bulldogs. He was such a great signing. Everyone thought he was going to be a utility, but he became a great player off the bench for us. You need him to do a big tackle or always consistently trying. I remember at games, whenever he got the ball and he'd run, he'd just keep moving. I never saw him stop running in his tracks. He'd always keep pushing, keep running, try and get an offload, or try and create second phase play. He was really good. He was such an outstanding signing for us. But without a doubt, the signing of the year, Stephen Crichton for the Bulldogs, he was... Do I even need to say anything? He became our captain, won Dally M Centre of the Year and Captain of the Year, took us all the way to the finals for the first time in 8 years, was a great motivational player for the squad. Do I need to say more? It was outstanding. And easily the signing of the year. However, the next topic I want to talk about is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. The best games of 2024. This was an extremely, extremely hard list to come up with because obviously I'm going to have biases on certain games, and certain games are going to mean something to me that they won't mean to someone else. And this list will be completely different to everybody else. I can't imagine anyone will have the same list as me. Some might have similar, but I think majority will have different lists. That's the beauty of our game. So with that, I propose a question for everyone. In the comments down below, give me your top 5 or top 10 if you'd like games of 2024. And yeah, I'd just love to see everyone else's thoughts and opinions on this. So for me, this is my top 10 games of 2024. In 10th spot at Magic Round, the Roosters versus the Sharkies. Sharkies getting the win 38 points to 30. This was a fantastic game filled with so many great try-scoring moments, a lot of brilliant tries. This was a outstanding game to watch. I remember watching this and being really engaged, enjoying the back and forth. And yeah, this was a really great game to watch. For me, that was one of the best games of the year. It was a high-scoring affair, brilliant playing. Both teams were highly skilled. It was like top 4 clash. That was a phenomenal game for Magic Round. And besides another game on this list, it would have been the game of the round for Magic Round. Moving on to 9th spot was a game from round 9, Manly versus the Raiders. Manly were up 24-0 at one point, And then the Raiders had an incredible comeback to win 26 points to 24. It was a fantastic game. A true showcasing of Raiders mentality and determination to never give up, never quit, don't stop trying. And, if they'd applied that to all their games, they would have probably made top 8 this year. But this was a great game from the Raiders, and an upset I didn't see coming. Some did, though. Moving on to 8th spot, which was the ultimate underdog story. The B-grade Warriors versus the Penrith Panthers up at Magic Round. As I said, this was a Warriors B team, riddled with injuries, veteran players, marquee players being out. This is against the Penrith side that was fairly dominant. Obviously, they had no Nathan Cleary, but they were still in great form and great shape, and they looked like a really entertaining team to watch. However, that all changed when they come against the B-grade Warriors. I thought they were going to win this thing 13+. But the Warriors just were persistent. They just didn't. They really tried their harder in this game, and ultimately that got them the win over the Panthers by like 2 points. I think it was 22 points to 20. There was a tackle so hard from a Warriors player that made a Panthers player vomit. And, the game was so shocking for the Panthers to lose that game that Ivan Cleary spent 2 minutes in the press conference room and then left. He was that shook by the loss. So yeah, that to me was one of the standout games of the year. In 7th spot, the Bulldogs versus the Broncos in round 21. Doggies got the win 41 points to 16. In what was one of the best upsets of the year. Broncos were at full strength. They had a full squad. Everybody was fit and healthy. Bulldogs, on the other hand, had no Crichton. A bunch of players out from injuries and like that sort of stuff. They were very much outnumbered. They're going up to Suncorp. They just lost to the Cowboys in a game they really should have won. I was very nervous for this game, but I never lost faith. I genuinely thought they were going to win this one, but I never thought the scoreline would go out the way it did. And yeah, it was just a brilliant game to watch from start to finish. Skelton scored that outstanding. Well, the whole team scored that outstanding try. So many great tackles, brilliant defense. Even for the Broncos, that Coturnier Staggs try right before halftime was some like really fantastic stuff. And if it wasn't against the Bulldogs, that would have been one of my tries of the year. Like, that was outstanding. That was actually probably going to make 11th spot for try of the year, even though it was against the Dogs. It was such a fantastic try. So for me, that was one of the games of the year. Moving on to 6th spot, this was Panthers versus the Melbourne Storms round 1, and what was one of the most defensive-centered games of the year. The halftime score was 2-0. Final score was 8-6. Each team was one try apiece. No, sorry, it was 8-0. Like, Melbourne held Panthers scoreless, and, Melbourne were able to keep their record of never losing round 1 under Craig Bellamy. It was a great showcasing of what we're to expect from each team this year, and ultimately they were our grand finalists. So I was very impressed with this game. I remember watching this with my friends at our local pub. It was really good. I enjoyed it. That was one of my favorite games because of just how intense it was and how enticing it was to watch. In 5th spot, which was one of the absolute standout games of the year, the Eels versus the Tigers in round 4. Tigers got the win 17 points to 16. I was so happy for the Tigers in this game. My mate who was at the game at CommBank, shout out Tyrese, he told me how loud it was, how engaged the crowd was at this game. Galvin, this was the game where Galvin really put his name forward as an outstanding 5'8". Olam put his name up as well as just because I'm at the Tigers doesn't mean I'm not in form still. Parramatta got embarrassed, and yeah, it was a fantastic game. And going down to 1 point, and Gutho missing the penalty goal, which could have won them the game. And it was a very gutsy Tigers win, and it was a win that actually put Tigers into the top 8 for a week, which was, that's a rare sight to see. So for me, one of the games of the year. In 4th spot, in round 5. Melbourne versus the Brisbane Broncos. The final score was 34 points to 32. Another high-scoring game. This was just filled with, it was back and forth for the whole game. It was entertaining, fast-paced footy. Both teams were just scoring tries, and it was a really good contest, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I remember watching this at home on Thursday night. It was a great way to get... Also, this was I know this is going to be a bit irrelevant, but this was the week, or that was the game that got me into into Supercoach, which began my Supercoach. Like, I remember that night after the game, downloading the app and beginning to build my Supercoach team. So I was obviously a few weeks late into it, but better late than never to start, I guess. But yeah, this was a fantastic game. One of my favorites of the year. Now we move on to the top 3. In third place, this was in round 23. The Penrith Panthers beat the Parramatta Eels down at 36 points to 34. This was a phenomenal game. Parramatta were playing their hearts out in this game. They were fighting to try and avoid the spoon, which they ultimately did, but it wasn't this game that saved them. They were trying their heart out. They were scoring tries. They looked like they could have won this game convincingly and been another Parramatta somehow getting the win over Penrith. But then with 10 minutes to go, they're down by 3 tries. Nathan Cleary does it himself once again. Sets up 2 tries. Gets all the conversions. And then sets up Brian. And then Isaac Tonga scores the game-winning try to seal it for Penrith. Guther again misses the penalty goal, which could have won them or tied up the game. And it was just a fantastic game to watch from start to finish. Another high-scoring affair. Now we move on to second place. This was in round 2. The Melbourne Storm versus the New Zealand Warriors. This was in Melbourne. This was a brilliant game. Melbourne started strong. Then Warriors, had to come back in the second half. And then in the last second of the game, it could not have possibly been any more climactic. In the dying seconds of the game, Xavier Coates scores the game-winning try in the corner. It was what was one of the best, this is the second best try of the year. The second best game of the year. It was such a phenomenal game with so many iconic moments. And it was a brilliant game from both teams. Really, no matter who lost, it would have been unlucky for them to lose. And yeah, it was just a fantastic game. But no surprise to anybody, my number 1 pick for the game of the year, the Bulldogs versus the Parramatta Eels in round 14. I was at this game. I was in the crowd at the 45,000, watching Blake Wilson score the game-winning try, watching all the great hits, all the 40-20s, the Birdo bombs, and I was with my mates, my dad, my uncle. We were all enjoying the game. We couldn't believe it. My mate even somehow called it that Wilson was going to score a try. Little did we know to be the game-winning try. And it was a fantastic game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved it. I remember screaming, yelling. I was going ballistic after that win because, we finally beat Parramatta. And for me, that was a turning point where I was like, yeah, we're going to make top 8 this year. So for me, the game of the year, Bulldogs was Parramatta Eels. Could not have been scripted any other way. Parramatta having a penalty count 7-1 at one point. A sin bin by Kurt Mann. 3 players getting taken off from injuries, either by concussions or just an injury. Like Preston with his ankle, Hayward and Curran going HIAs, sin bins, penalties. Parramatta being they were literally leading the whole game. It was a fantastic, fantastic game. I loved it, and to me is a core memory, and I'll be cherishing that for years to come. So for me, those are my favorite games of 2024. Wow, that was great to cover. So now that's finished, and I've now done the last part, or the second last part of my 2024 season wrap up. We'll now be doing part 4 of my season review of every team in 2024. This week will be the top 4 teams: the Cronulla Sharks, Sydney Roosters, Penrith Panthers, and Melbourne Storm. As always, the stats I'll be covering in this discussion will be brought to you by Bloke in a Bar. They put out all these stats for us to read. That's where I'll be basing my information off of. And without further ado, let's dive straight into it. First, we'll be covering the 4th place Cronulla Sharks. They came 4th, 16 wins, 8 losses. they scored 653 points and conceded 431. You look at that compared to last year, they came 6th, 14 wins, 10 losses. They scored 619 and conceded 497, so just about nearly 500. In terms of attacking stats, they had the 5th most points per game with 25.7. They had the 10.1 errors per game, so the 9th most. They completed 79%, which was 11th. In terms of defense and discipline, they conceded 19 points per game, which was 14th. So actually one of the better defending teams. They missed 33.9 tackles per game, which was also 11th. They conceded 6 penalties per game, which was 2nd. They had 6 sin-bins across the whole year and 0 send-offs. Their draw went out like this. They beat the Warriors, they beat the Bulldogs, they lose to the Tigers at Leichhardt Oval, again smashed. Then they go on an incredible win streak. They beat the Raiders, South Sydney Rabbitohs, Cowboys, Raiders, Dragons, Melbourne, and Roosters. So they were being teams all across different parts of the ladder. Then it was all changed in round 12 when they got pumped 42 points to 0, which sent their season spiraling out of control. They then lost to the Eels. Then they had a win against the Broncos. Then they lose to the Dolphins. They have the bye. They lose to the Bulldogs by 1 point. They lose to the Titans. Then they get a massive win over the Tigers, which brings them back into the fold. They have a bye. They lose to the Cowboys. They then have a win streak again. They beat Souths, Titans, Newcastle Dragons. The Warriors beat them in an incredible game. They then get the win over Manly, which, that was thankful for the Bulldogs because we got a home final because of that. Then their final series went as followed. They lost week 1, won week 2, lost week 3. And the 2 losses they had in the final series was against the 1st and 2nd place teams, and they lost 13 plus in both games. Now, I have so many mixed opinions on this game. On this team for 2024. Because obviously I'm going off the mentality last year that I believe that the Sharkies were pretenders. Because last year they were beating all the bottom 8 teams, they were thrashing them, and then they get pumped by all the top 8 teams. This year there was a lot better for them. They were beating teams across different areas of the ladder, and I will give them credit for that. But I don't know, there was something off about them this year. And of course we can link it back to Nico Hines and the fact that when he performed poorly, the team kind of suffered from that. Key stuff is like the Penrith game, the Bulldogs game in round 17, the Titans game even. And then there was in round, I think it was like 8 weeks out before finals, he's out with a severe leg injury. It was a very, very weird season for the Sharkies. They came 4th, but they didn't deserve to be in the top 4. I remember for a long time I kept making the argument that Sharkies, they didn't deserve to be in the top 4. Something about them, I just didn't think they were a good team. They didn't deserve some of their wins. Like the one against Newcastle, they didn't deserve. There was a few others. I was just not really entertained. I don't know. I'm wrapping my head around how. I'm looking at the draw. They started this season so well. I genuinely thought they had a chance to make an impact, but then they had games like the one against Penrith, and the one against Parramatta, or even the one against the Dolphins. They should have won that. And yes, as much as we can blame Nico Hines, the whole team didn't perform. On paper, they are a top 4 team, but they're just not showing it against the top dogs. And you look at the team. For me, their best players this year was, Braden Trindle, Cameron McInnes, Ronaldo Mulatalo, Carl Ittle. They had so many great players this year. And then you look to next year, they've got AFB coming in, and you think, my God, these guys should be premiership contenders, but they're not. And I personally didn't think they deserved to be top 4. Hell, all the period I thought there was a chance they could fall out of the 8. I don't know, something about it, I just don't really rate them. And again, at times they were incredibly enjoyable to watch. Like that Tigers game was just brutal. Or even the Raiders game. Oh, that one, yeah, that was really good. The Cowboys game was really brutal. Like they had some big wins. Like at times they were clicked, but after that Penrith game, that rattled something in them. They were losing against teams they really shouldn't have lost to. They had some really disappointing games. Nico Hines lost all of his confidence. Origin didn't help either, but Nico Hines was just thrown out of whack. And yeah, their final series went as I kind of expected. I thought they'd go straight sets out. You know, they made it to a prelim, so can't really say much. But yeah, overall, I wasn't thoroughly impressed by them. You know, they weren't too engaging. I personally didn't rate them that well. And yeah, I think overall, there was a lot to take away in a good light this year, but there was also a lot to take away negatively. And, you know, there's a lot of areas they need to improve on, I think, moving on to 2025 and beyond. So, in saying all that, this comes to the part where I got to give them a rating out of 10 and a score. Before I do that, though, I'll do my 2 best games and their 2 worst losses. So, we'll do their 2 best wins first. One of them definitely has to be the 40-0 win against the Raiders. Like, that was just a complete dominant performance. And another one would probably be their win against the Melbourne Storm in Melbourne, where I genuinely didn't think they'd win this, and you know they proved me wrong, and that was a fantastic win by them. Now their worst losses, easily one of them is the Penrith one, 42-0. Like that is just an embarrassing loss. And the other one, actually, I'm going to go with the Dolphins game. You know, they really should not have lost that game. Like, I genuinely thought they would, like, you know, come out and I thought they'd smash the Dolphins, but Dolphins, you know, resilient. But this is about the Sharks. They were very disappointing in that game. Nico Hines could have clutched it up and made it potentially golden point thriller, but missed the kick. And, you know, it was a very disappointing loss by them. And I was shook by that. So now we got to give them a rating out of 10 and an ABC scoring. So I was at first, I was very harsh on them. But I think now you got to think about it. They made top 4. They went all the way to a prelim. They won a finals game. I can't say too much about them. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to give the Sharkies a 7 out of 10. And I'll give them a B. Actually, B minus. I think that's relatively fair. So, I think that every team onwards from now is nothing but straight positivity. So we move on to the Sydney Roosters. They finished 3rd with 16 wins, 8 losses. They scored 738 points and conceded 463. You look at last year. They finished 7th. 13 wins, 11 losses, scored 472 points, and conceded 496. Attacking stats. They were the best attacking team of 2024 with 29.9 points per game. You might as well say 30. They had about 10 errors per game. They completed 80%. In terms of defense and discipline, they conceded 20.6 points per game. They conceded 7 penalties per game, which was first. They were the most ill-disciplined. They had 10 sin bins across the whole year, which is 3rd. And they had the most send-offs with 2, both of which were against the Bulldogs. Now you look at their draw across this year. They started out really well. They beat the Broncos 20 points to 10. They lose to Manly, but then they beat Souths. They then lose to Penrith and Bulldogs. They beat Newcastle. They lose to Melbourne. You know, but I think by this point they were out of the 8, and it looked like they were going to have a rocky year. But like usual, it takes them a while to find their form, and then they click. They then win 3 in a row against the Dragons, the Broncos, and the Warriors, all of which they only conceded 18 points and scored minimum 38. Then they lose to the Sharkies, but then they beat the Raiders in Canberra. They lose to the Cowboys in a very shocking loss. They then go 4 in a row and they beat the Bulldogs. They beat the Eels, the Bulldogs, the Tigers, and the Dragons. They have a bye. They lose to Melbourne and by 13 plus, which is one of their really disappointing losses. They then beat Manly, beat the Dolphins, beat the Eels, and then the Titans. They lose to the Raiders, which is when their season was thrown out of whack. They then beat the Rabbitohs, lose to Panthers, beat Manly, lose to Melbourne in the preliminary finals, 48 points to 18. To me, in my opinion, they were the most interesting and the most fun team to watch this year. Again, when you're the best attacking team, you're the most entertaining team to watch. Like, I enjoyed watching the Roosters because they were just... The way their attack flowed was just pure rugby league magic. And to me, it was so entertaining. I thoroughly enjoyed, watching them just pile on points was just so entertaining. Mainly because I kept tipping them because I just knew they were going to do this sort of stuff. Again, I think they scored the most amount of points on average by a Roosters team since 2004. Like, they were scoring points for fun this year. And you look at the likes of Sam Walker, Teddy, Manu, Angus Crichton, Connor Watson, Joseph Swali, Daniel Tupou, Dominic Young, Luke Keary. Like, that's naming their 1 to 7. Like, you got to look at the rest of their squad. Their forward pack: JWH, Braden Smith, Lindsay Collins, and then you got the younger ones like Sia Wong, Nafahu White. You had the emergence of the signing of Spencer Leniu. Like, the Roosters squad, this was their year to really win a premiership. And they were just so entertaining to watch. They had strike force across the entire board. Look at some of their wins. They're scoring 40 points on roughly about 40 points, 30 points. 60 points in one of their games. Even in the finals, they scored 40 points against Manly. Or then the 48 against the Titans. And there were sometimes they'd score a lot of points, but they'd concede a lot. Like against Manly in round 21. They scored 34, but conceded 30. So, be 50-50 on that one. But, again, my point is they were the most entertaining team because they scored so many points and they just had so many fantastic wins. Obviously, Teddy was their best player. Dally M, fullback of the year, was second place for Dally M. Angus Crichton, Sam Walker, they were fantastic. The Angus Crichton story was one of the best stories to come out of this year. Started the year in Reggie's. He wasn't making the squad. He was dealing with mental health issues. He overcame it all. Won the Wally Lewis Medal in Origin. Is representing Australia in Pacific Championship matches. It's such a great story. And, winning Dally M, second row of the year, and was easily the best second row in the year. So for me, Angus Crichton was such a fantastic player, and the Roosters squad as a whole was just fantastic. Unfortunately, I've got to cover where they went wrong. Because obviously they didn't win a premiership, and they ended their final series by getting smashed 30 plus. You first got to look at the way they started their year. From 7 games, 3 wins, 4 losses. Some of them were really close. Some of them were... Actually, they're all close losses. And you got to look at their record against literally the 2 teams above them, the Melbourne Storm and the Penrith Panthers. I think the record now is 1 win in 22 matches against both teams. That's a shocking stat. The Tigers have better stats. You got to think, why is it that the only 2 teams they can't beat are those 2? And again, in the final series, much similar to the Sharkies, their only 2 losses were against Penrith and Melbourne because they're just so fucking good. And they were both by 13 plus again. The only difference is between the Sharkies and the Roosters. One is clearly better than the other. The Roosters are a far better team. On paper, statistically, they were just a better team. And I thoroughly enjoyed the Roosters this year. Their performances were fantastic. They really need to work on this against the big teams. They even became flat track bullies actually this year. They didn't beat that many teams in the top 8. Manly managed to beat them this year. Bulldogs beat them. Cowboys beat them. Penrith and Melbourne beat them. The Sharkies beat them. I think the only team they didn't beat, or the only team that didn't beat them, was Newcastle, and that was only by 2 points. So actually, this year they became the Sharks' flat track bullies, but they were a bit better because their attack was just so good to watch. Bit different. So overall, Roosters had a fantastic year. A shame though that they didn't get a chance to win a premiership because now they're losing Manu, Swali, JWH, Tupanua. There's one more I'm forgetting. Luke Keary, and both Sam Walker and Brandon Smith are out on ACL injuries. They'll miss all preseason, a good chunk of next year. Again, that loss to the Raiders, 14 points to 12, was when their season fell apart. Because that was the game where 2 ACL injuries and Victor Radley does his shoulder. Like that is a shocking horror show in one game. And yeah, that was the game that ended their season, in my opinion. Their season was done after that. They weren't going to make it far. And we were right. So I'm going to do their best wins and losses. We'll do the losses first because they're a lot harder to pick. One of them has to be the one against Melbourne in round 20 when they lose 24-8. That was a really bad loss. I'm not going to pick their finals ones. Like any game they lost after the Keary and Brandon Smith incident, I can't really say is one of their worst because it was just circumstances. So in the regular season, the other loss that was really bad. Probably the Bulldogs game, honestly. To have an incredible comeback and nearly win it, that's a pretty good effort from them. But it was just that first half, they're down 26-0. That is a terrible, terrible loss. Now look at their best wins. One of them is definitely the 60 points to 18 win against the Dragons. I know the Dragons were actually, they were somewhat the favourite. Maybe not the favourite, they were close to being the favourites against the Roosters. And that performance, that dominant performance where everyone was scoring try doubles, it was a try scoring affair for them. Walker was having a field. I think he scored 160 Supercoach points. He was just outstanding that game. That was easily one of their best wins. The other one was against South Sydney in round 3 when they beat them 48 points to 6. That was just a brutal, brutal game. But again, fun to watch. South Sydney getting pummeled. That's always going to be a fun thing to watch. So now to give them a rating and ranking. So I'm going to give the Roosters an 8.5 out of 10 with a score of an A. They were so good to watch, and I highly, highly rate them. Now we move on to our top 2 teams. And since the second place team won the premiership, we'll actually cover the first place team first. So now we'll be doing the Melbourne Storm. They finished first on the ladder. 19 wins, 5 losses. Scored 692 points and conceded 449. Look at last year. They finished third. 16 wins, 8 losses. Scored 627 points and conceded 459. Attacking stats. They were the second best attacking team in the NRL. They came first for the line breaks. They had 9.8 errors per game, and they were also completing at 80%. In terms of defense and discipline, they conceded 18.2 points per game, which was 16th, so they conceded the second least amount of points per game. They missed the least amount of tackles per game. They conceded the 10th most amount of penalties per game, and across the whole year, they had 7 sin bins with 0 send-offs. You look at the way their draw played out. Obviously, since they barely lost, there's not many. They had a lot of win streaks. They started well. They beat Penrith and Warriors. They lose to Newcastle, but that was pretty much when most of their spine was even playing. They had the bye. Then they beat the Broncos, the Bulldogs, the Roosters, the Rabbitohs, the Titans, and the Sharks. And the Titans, and then they lose to the Sharks. They beat the Eels. They lose to Manly. And then the winning streaks begin. They beat Newcastle, Warriors, Dolphins, Raiders, Tigers. They have a bye. They beat the Roosters and the Eels. They lose to the Dragons somehow. Then they beat the South Sydney Rabbitohs, Penrith Panthers, Dolphins. They lose to the Cowboys, but that was when there was no one in their side pretty much. Then they beat the Broncos. And then their final series begins. They beat the Sharks and the Roosters, and then ultimately lose to Penrith in the grand final, 14 points to 6. This is a fantastic run for them this year. For me, Melbourne were actually the best team of 2024. Even though Penrith won the premiership, Melbourne, in my opinion, were the best team of the year. They were the most consistent. They were the best at what they were doing. Like, look at that win streak. Look at the way it all played out. Like, that is fantastic. You look at some of the other teams we're covering. They would kill to have this sort of run. Like, this was fantastic from Melbourne. And all their losses were close. I don't think once they lost by 13 plus. I'm just having a read through. They lost to Newcastle by 2. The Sharks beat them by 7. Manly beat them by 6. Dragons beat them by 2. Cowboys beat them by 8. And then Penrith beat them by 8. Also Dragons beat them by 2. Yeah, I'm having a look. Not a single loss was 13 plus. Hell, not even 10 plus. Like, if they lost, it was a close one. But when they won, again, they were I think they were the second best attacking team in the comp behind the Roosters for a reason. Like, towards the back end of the year, I think in their final series, like their last, like since the Cowboys game, I think their averaging was like 40 points a game. Look at the run. No, since the Dolphins game, they scored 48 against the Dolphins, 30 against the Broncos, 50 against the what's wrong with me? They score 48 against the Dolphins, 30 against the Cowboys, 50 against the Broncos, 37 on the Sharks, 48 on the Roosters, and then the grand final they score 6. So, huge letdown when you look at that run. But again, they did go up against Penrith. Like, what can you do? But Melbourne were fantastic. And for best players, like, geez, where do I begin? You could pretty much put their entire spine. Cameron Munster, Ryan Pappenhausen, Harry Grant, Jerome Hughes. 2 of them won the Dally M for their positions, and one of them won the Dally M overall. Then you got the likes of Xavier Coates, Jack Howarth, Will Warbrick, Nick Meaney, Tyrone Wishart, Nelson, Big Nels, Eli Katoa, Sean Bloor, Trent Leura. Like, I'm just listing off players. These guys are all fantastic players, and again, Melbourne does what Melbourne does best, and just they create so many great players. Like, the emergence of Suafa'alonga this year when Pappenhausen was out injured, and Tyrone Wishart while Cameron Munster was out with a groin injury from majority of the year. There's Wishy really cementing himself as one of the best utilities in the game at the moment, and will probably go to a club for a very high contract. Like, they were fantastic this year, and for a long time they were my favourites to win the comp. But that was until I saw the run Penrith was having. I was like, no, Penrith are going to win it, and ultimately I was right. But my goodness, the Melbourne Storm were fantastic. I could not get enough of this performance from this team, and I was totally enjoying it. And early predictions for next year, they actually already are the favourites to win the premiership. Besides the Bulldogs, mate, these guys are a hot shot. Will most likely win the premiership. I can't see Penrith win 5 in a row. You never know. I don't think they'd do 4 or even 3. But Melbourne, they were fantastic, and I think with the spine they have, they should win a premiership together, like the 4 of them. So I'm going to do their best wins and losses. We'll do their best wins first because their losses were not many to pick from. So best wins. I want to pick... Alright, obviously one of them was against the Warriors, and they beat them 30 points to 26, where Xavier Coates scores that game-winning try right at the death. Now, as much as I want to pick maybe one of their wins over Penrith, because they're both fantastic, I want to pick one of their dominating games. And the one I want to pick is the one against... I'm deciding between the Dolphins or the Broncos. No, I'm going to pick the Broncos in round 27 to win 50 points to 12, where they didn't need to do this. They didn't need to. Like, after they smashed the Dolphins 48 points to 6, they locked up the minor premiership. They didn't need to do that, but they just did it. Jerome Hughes and Will Warbrick got a hat trick. Jerome Hughes got 187 Supercoach points, I believe. Like, that is unheard of. To be scored by a halfback as well, like, that is outrageous. Especially in a round 27 game when you already locked up the minor premiership and you know you got finals next week. They didn't need to do it, but to prove a point, they did. Also, for correction, yeah, I was right. 187 Supercoach points. That is insane. So yeah, that was one of the other biggest wins of the year. Now for losses, I'll go through all of them and I'll tell you the worst two. So the Knights one, that wasn't even close because that was like injured. They had nothing else. I can't really fault them for that. The Sharkies one, well, yes, it was a loss at home. The Sharkies were they're on a roll at this point. The Sharks were just outstanding at this point in the game, or this point in the season, so I can't blame them for that one. The Cowboys game, that was like a B-grade Melbourne Storm. They had all their stars out. To only lose by 8 points, like, that's not that bad. I think their worst two, one of them would probably be the Manly game because they had a lot going for them in that game. They probably should have won that one. But easily, without a doubt, their worst loss of the year. And what was the upset of the year? The Dragons gained their first ever win against Melbourne in 25 years. To win by 2 points, and the way they did was Sloan outplayed Pappenhausen. And, you know, the Dragons playing so well and defending so well. Like, that was the Dragons' best win of the year. That was the Melbourne's worst loss of the year. That was a terrible performance from them. Like, they had no right to lose that. I thought Melbourne were going to run away with this thing like 50 plus. Full honesty, because the week prior, Penrith had just annihilated the Dragons. So to see Melbourne lose like that was shocking, and that was easily their worst loss of the year. So now it comes to the really easy part, giving them a rating and a ranking. So I'm giving them a 9.5 out of 10 and an A+. Like, the only thing they were missing was just winning that premiership. If they had just won the premiership, like, they're 0.5 off. Like, a 9.5 out of 10 is fantastic. But I can't give them a 10 because they didn't win the premiership. And but they had a fantastic season. They were outstanding. I could not have enjoyed watching Melbourne more, and they will be premiership favourites going into next year easily. Now we move on to the last team for the evening. The premiership winning team for 4 years in a row, the Penrith Panthers. They finished second with 17 wins and 7 losses. They scored 580 points and conceded 394. Now this is where it gets interesting. When you look at last year, there's actually a bit of a drastic difference. While yes, they came first, so it's only a 1 spot difference, and only a wins-losses only by 1 difference. Only 18 wins and 6 losses, only a 1 difference. If they're for and against, that's so different. In 2023, they scored 645 points. That's 65 points more than they did this year. And they conceded 312 last year. This year, they conceded 394. That's 82-point difference. So, despite them winning the premiership, they had a bit of a step down when you look at their previous performances. But again, it's kind of pointless because, they won the premiership. So they scored 24.1 points per game, so they came 6th. They had the most meters per game with 1,594. They came 2nd for the most tackles in the opposition, 20. They completed 81%, which was the 3rd most. But it was their defense and discipline stats that were just outstanding. They conceded 15.4 points per game. They were the number 1 defensive side of 2024. They missed the 2nd least amount of tackles, 31.1 per game. They conceded 5.8 penalties per game, so 5th. They only had 4 sin bins across the entire year. And they had 24 games, so that's 1 sin bin every 8 games. And of course, 0 send-offs. And then you look at the way their draw played out. A bit of an interesting one. So they start the year by losing to Melbourne 8-0. Then they beat the Eels, the Broncos, and the Roosters. They then somehow lose to Manly. They have a bye. They beat the Tigers, the Cowboys, the Rabbitohs, and the Bulldogs. And then they have a huge loss. Well, not huge, but an upset loss to the Warriors. Then they have a nothing short of an outstanding win over the Sharks. Then they somehow lose to the Dragons. Then they beat Manly and Newcastle. They have a bye. They lose to the Cowboys. They then go on a win streak. They beat the Broncos. They have a bye. Beat the Dolphins, the Dragons, the Knights, and the Eels. Then, for the first time in several years, they have back-to-back losses against Melbourne and the Raiders. But then they end their year on a high note and go on an incredible win streak. They beat the Rabbitohs, the Titans. Then they go into finals and they beat the Roosters, the Sharks, and then the Melbourne Storm in the grand final, ultimately winning their fourth straight premiership in a row and their fifth grand final, and going down as the greatest team in rugby league history, in my opinion. Now, with that claim, what else can I say about this team? Like a couple of weeks ago, I covered the Penrith Panthers, and what is there more to say? They are, in my opinion, they are the greatest team we have ever seen play in the history of rugby league. And I'm willing to debate about this. So again, in the comments, if you think I'm wrong, tell me, and let's have a debate about this, about which team is the best team of all time. Because I think it's the Penrith Panthers of this era, this dynasty that they've built. But again, we're talking about just this year alone. They had some really great wins this year. Stuff like the Sharks, Manly when they got their payback, the Dragons won where they beat them 46-10. But then they had some really strange losses, like the one against Manly, the Warriors, the Dragons, Cowboys, the Raiders. The only one that makes sense is the Melbourne ones, because Melbourne was like the best team of the year, so like that makes sense. But the other ones, again, we're saying this because like the Penrith Panthers, you can't imagine a team beating them, but of course they have to lose games. Like they can't not lose games. That'd be absurd. But some of them were like really bad. Obviously, we'll cover that a bit later. But I want to talk about their performance overall. These guys had a lot of adversity this year. Quite a few players were out from injuries, origin. Their star halfback was out for like half the year. Like he only played 12 games this year. And I think in the regular season was 12 games. So he did not play a lot of footy this year. But then the likes of Jerome Luai, James Fisher-Harris, Bryant, all these boys, they stood up and they showcased to us why they're the best. Why they've been in the premiership business for so long. They do what they do best and they keep winning. They keep playing hard. And look at them now. Like, I've already spent, like, that 1 hour podcast I spent already talking about how great Penrith is. But I can't help myself but continue to talk about them. Because they're just even this year, they were so good to watch. You know, they had an incredible win against the Eels. They had so many great games. And the way they played so methodically and almost robot-like. Everyone knew their position. They knew what they had to do. They just executed their roles to a T. And again, it may not be the most exciting football, but when they turn it on, my gosh, it is phenomenal stuff to watch. Like Brian To'o was outstanding. The outstanding players were stuff like Brian To'o, Jerome Luai, Fisher-Harris, Leota, Kenny, Dylan Edwards finally got to be Origin fullback. Isaiah Yeo had the best year he's ever had as a Penrith Panther, and he's been a Penrith Panther for 10 fucking years, and this is his best year by a substantial margin, in my opinion. What else? I'm trying to fathom what else I can possibly say about Penrith. They are so good. They're a fantastic team, and yeah, there's not much else I can say really. I think we'll just do their best wins and losses. I think that's all I can really do. Like, Like, what can I say that hasn't already been said about 1,000 times over? The only thing I can say really for concerns is they came second. Certain cracks are starting to show potentially. Both their centers could potentially be exposed. And I know going into next year, Luai and Fisher Harris, in my opinion, they'll be their two biggest losses because I don't know who they can have that will cover those losses. Particularly Jerome Luai, but Fisher Harris as well. Like, their alpha forward in their pack, like, they're both tremendous losses. And again, we always say this, but I think next year might be the first time they might not actually be able to, like, fill those gaps. But it's Penrith. You don't know what they'll produce next year. So, their two best wins and two worst losses. We'll do their two best wins first because there's so many to pick from. So, for best wins, we'll do a dominant win and a close one. We'll do the Parramatta game in round 23 and the Sharkies game in round 12. Now, in terms of worst losses, one of them has to be... I won't do the ones that were impacted by Origin. Like the Dragons one and the Cowboys one were both Origin impacted. We can't blame them for that. The Melbourne ones will exclude, so that's already 4. The Raiders one was mainly because of an intercept pass. Like that, we can't... Like, it's not really a bad loss. It's just unlucky. So that leaves me with really not many options. I think the two I'm going to pick will be the Manly game and the Warriors game. The Manly one was a shocking one because that was their only 13 plus loss. Like, that was really bad. I was shocked that they lost that one. And then the Warriors won because it was against a B-grade Warriors side. They should not have lost that game with their roster and who the Warriors didn't have in their team. They should not have lost that. But every dog has his day. And it was the Warriors' day that day. So, yeah, those are the Penrith Panthers' two worst losses. And they were both early on in the year, now that I'm looking back on it. So this is where it's going to get a bit tricky. I'm going to do a rating and ranking. Despite Penrith Panthers winning the premiership this year, due to like some of their really poor, like not poor games, but the way that at times they actually kind of look like they weren't the best. Like, I'm trying to find a way to perfectly describe this. They were a fantastic team, but they came second for a reason. So I can't give them a higher rating above Melbourne, despite them winning a premiership. That is why I'm also going to give Penrith a 9.5 out of 10, with also a score of A+. I can't pick one over the other. Again, if Melbourne had won the premiership, Panthers would be a 9 out of 10, and Melbourne would be a 10 out of 10. But Penrith did win the premiership, so they get that 0.5, and they become a 9.5 out of 10, both getting an A+. And yeah, that's my rating for Penrith Panthers. 9.5 out of 10 with an A+ ranking. And so now that I'm having a look at this list, that is a wrap for part 4 of my season review for every team in 2024. Next week is the big one. Next week we'll be covering the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, and that is going to be a fantastic video. I've been working hard on this one. I cannot wait to cover this one in great detail, and there's a reason why I kept this team separate. Not only because it's my team, well, yeah, it actually is. It's because it's my team, and I can't wait to do that. It will also be Pacific Championships Finals review next week, so stay tuned for that. That's a little preview for next week. Next week will be Pacific Championships Finals review and a season review for the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. And there may potentially be a draw video. If the draw does come out next week, like the rumors are saying, then we will be doing a draw video into next week. And so with that, I think we're done for the day. Alright, everybody. Thank you for listening to episode 14 of the Wild Doggies Fan podcast. If you're new here, please like the video, comment down below, subscribe, and stay tuned for all future videos. Also, please follow me on Instagram at the Wild Doggies Fan. We're on the road to 100 followers. We're at 90 followers at the time of recording. We're so close. We're nearly there. Please head over to my Instagram and hit that follow button. Stay tuned for next week. It's going to be a huge, huge episode We'll be covering a review for the Bulldogs season and Pacific Championships finals. Stay tuned for that. Once again, thank you all for listening. Make sure you subscribe, hit that follow button on Instagram, and I'll see you all next week for another episode of the Wild Doggies Fan podcast.